Well, welcome back to this chapter on memory. I just want to finish up with a few additional thoughts regarding memory and specifically how to improve or enhance memory performance. In review, in this chapter, you may remember that we looked at memory structure and function of both working memory and long-term memory. And we talked about some theories about why we forget. And now we're finishing up with just some strategies that can help with memory performance. So first of all, as we work with motor skill acquisition, anything we can do to increase a movement's meaningfulness will help in the memory process. Imagery is a very powerful rehearsal strategy, and as we use imagery, that again gives us a picture of the movement, so it gives meaning to the movement we're trying to replicate. So often we use metaphors and paint a picture of what we're trying to get. An example here, if you're a swimmer and you're trying to teach the side stroke, we might use a metaphor. It's like picking apples and putting them in a basket. Or for follow through on the set, it might be like follow through like Superman. Or if we're jumping, jump straight as an arrow, land light as a feather. Those would be all imagery pictures that you could paint that will give more meaning to the movement you're trying to get your client, patient, player to produce. So imagery is a very powerful means of helping remember movement information. Also using verbal cues, putting attention to different parts of the movement task can be very helpful. For instance, release at 2 o'clock would be a verbal cue, maybe focusing on follow through. Scratch your back for the tennis serve. Thumbs together, lock your elbows. That's a verbal cue I might use for teaching forearm passing. Land light as a feather. We use that for an analogy, but it also could be used as a verbal cue. When I teach topspin serve, we talk about peel the orange. So again, you can use verbal cues along with imagery to help increase the meaningfulness of the movement you're trying to have remembered. So why does imagery and verbal cues, why do they work so well? Again, reduces the complexity of verbal instructions. If I'm instructing how to do a volleyball spike, if I talk about whip your arm or fast arm swing, that gives a picture in just a few words about how to actually conduct your arm swing with the volleyball spike. So imagery and verbal cues help reduce the amount of verbal information you're going to give. It helps to take something that's maybe abstract to the learner and make it more concrete. You're also focusing more on the outcome of the movement rather than the movement itself. And again, you're just putting together a nice, tight, concise package of information so that later, perhaps when you're not around, the person can remember how to do the skill. Some other strategies to help improve performance beside giving movement meaningfulness to movement, we've also just the intention to remember. Saying this is important, remember this. In class I might say, and this will be on the test. Immediately gives the sense of remembering this information because it's important. Intention to remember can also deal with incidental memory, things that we remember that we perhaps did not plan on remembering, but it is remembered throughout a lifetime. And then lastly, just how we organize information. Organizing information can really help us improve our memory. So organizing sequences of movement. Again, for the volleyball spike, which I consider a very complex movement, we might put those into three different subcategories: feet to the ball, jump, swing fast. And we could unpack each one of those, but again, it's a nice, concise way of providing information of how to remember to do a spike. Also, just chunking information. And again, you're familiar with chunking. You have a large amount of information you're trying to remember, and you put those pieces of information together that are similar, that have some sort of connection, and you're better able to remember it. To be honest, in textbooks, they chunk information. They put information that's connected to each other into units within a textbook. And as you get better at a skill, it appears that people who are more advanced in the skill begin to organize information as a result of practice. So, strategies to improve memory: make it meaningful, provide intention to remember, and recognize that if you organize information into nice sequences, it'll be better able to be remembered as well. Just kind of finishing up this idea of improving memory, especially relates to motor skills. Let's talk a little bit about location and distance characteristics. When you're doing a movement, we know through the research that endpoint location is remembered better than the entire movement. So our movement in location remember better when it's within the person's own body. And so as we look at teaching motor skills, work on focusing on endpoints. That seems to be remembered better. And also using key spatial positions during the movement so that kinesthetically that point of the movement can be remembered. For instance, if I'm doing a golf swing and maybe I'm trying to work on on my whole swing, but I might say on the backswing, take your club up to 12 o'clock and then bring it down through to 9 o'clock. So I'm emphasizing the movement, and I'm giving some key spatial positions of how to produce that movement. As we finish up this chapter, you have a lab that you'll do, and it basically deals with practice tests context. And the principle is called the encoding specificity principle. It's been around for a while. It talks about how we encode information and how we retrieve information. And so it's the principle basically says the more alike the encoding is to the retrieval, the more likely is that you're going to remember it. So the more the test condition context resembles the practice context, the idea is the better the retention performance. And that's a very well-known principle. We talk about practicing like you want to play in the game. But you have a lab that you'll be doing that's explained a little later on in this module. So there's a homework assignment as well for this chapter. If you have any questions, just let me know. And remember, memory is a gift from God. And if it weren't for memory, every time we approached a similar situation, we'd have to start all over again.